but I'm going to start the session now. We're at 1 minute past one. Welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn webinar from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Today we're talking about the risk reduction benefits of offsite construction, and I've got with me two guest speakers I'm really delighted to have in this session who bring huge experience between them, but also different perspectives of the offsite construction world. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a moment. First of all, I'm Dave Emery. I'm a consultant with the Supply Chain School. I've got a long background in designing in the offsite world, and I lead on the development of the school's resources. Now, I'm going to be in conversation today with, as I said, two industry experts. The first is Warren Fothergill. Warren, rather than me talk about you, would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, where you work, and some of your experiences and knowledge?
Hi, I'm Warren Fothergill, the HSC and ESG manager for Premier Modular Limited. I've been into the health and safety domain since 1995, and I've worked in various forms of construction, from engineering construction through to fabrication and modular construction for the last 7 years. I've been the environmental manager in various different positions and a focus on ESG Premier since 2021, and we've progressed quite rapidly as a company, and I support Anne-Lee Roscoe, who's our director, in striving to get improvements across the environment, sustainability, social elements and the governance here at Premier Modular.
Thanks, Warren. I've got to get used to calling you the award-winning Warren Fothergill. Anne-Lee Roscoe, would you like to say
the
hi?
award-winning Anne-Lee Roscoe as well, to be fair.
Well, I'm not sure about that. My name is Anne-Lee Roscoe. I am the ESG and HR director. I took on the ESG element in 2021 when we got bought out by Cabot as a sort of a formal entity in the role. But before that, I've always been human resources and all things people, and there's obviously a big overlap in terms of the social and the government sides, but the E part of the ESG has been a huge learning curve and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I've been with Premier Modular now since 2016, so the years are clocking up, and each day I come into work excited to be here and enjoy what I'm doing. So I think that's always a good thing to be able to say.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Andy. So audience, a little bit later on, we'll use the Q&A facility. So just to reiterate, please, if you've got any questions for our speakers as the session goes on, use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. Also keep an eye on what other people might be asking, because if you see a question that you would particularly like answering, you can use the little thumbs up icon next to someone else's question to push that question towards the top of the list. So have a listen to the conversation that we're going to have. I'm going to engage Anne-Lee and Warren in a discussion about some of the benefits of offsite construction, particularly on how we feel it can de-risk projects. And the background to this discussion arises from the school's offsite leadership group. So we have just over 20 leadership groups within the school, and these are for our partners only. These are our subscribing customers who pay an annual subscription. One of the partner benefits is they get to sit on some of our leadership groups. And really the leadership groups are an area where we can bring together disparate companies with common interests as it were a forum for collaboration and idea exchange, best practice exchange, and so on. And really one of the functions of the group, as well as giving that platform for collaboration, is to let the industry experts guide us in the school as to what are the important topics that we should be addressing. And once we set about creating suitable materials, the group members support us and contribute to the development of new materials. And really that is the reason that we're running this session today, because one of the challenges that the group set the school is to articulate some of the benefits of offsite construction that one might not normally think of. I believe that when you're considering offsite construction solutions, you need to have a very broad view of KPIs and measures by which you determine the value and the likelihood of success. And one of those, I believe quite firmly, is that offsite construction can de-risk your project in quite a number of ways. And it's really that we're going to talk about today. The traditional construction industry, we've always used that triangle of KPIs, which is time, cost, and quality. And although I love the construction industry and I feel very passionately that it's capable of the most incredible achievements in what we do deliver, if we're really honest with ourselves, we're not terribly good at fulfilling the time, cost, and quality requirements. I think it's something like only 40% of projects are delivered in accordance with the original programme. We're very familiar with cost overruns, which, when public money is involved, make the headlines. And I'd suggest to you that we are not terribly good at handing over yet defect-free buildings. And I rather tongue-in-cheek put up that picture of Ronan Point, which many of you won't remember, but that was a very famous or infamous tower block that suffered a progressive collapse on one corner. And when the inquiry was carried out, it was found that the prefabricated concrete floors, where they met the prefabricated concrete walls instead of being joined with concrete, had in some cases wet newspaper in the joints. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that that's what we do in the modern construction industry, but nevertheless, we've got a reputation for not delivering particularly defect-free buildings. And I think the industry's got a number of other difficulties that we face. And if we're talking about risk, as we are in this session, one of those biggest risks must be the declining workforce. Mark Farmer identified this in the Farmer Review some 9 years ago now. So we really need to do more with fewer people. And we actually need to find new ways of delivering projects. And I believe a smart construction industry will bring together offsite construction and digital construction to enable us to do more with the people we have, but also hopefully to bring in new entrants to our industry. We're not a terribly attractive industry to young people compared to other sectors. So I think we need to do a lot to articulate some of the benefits of working in construction and also some of the wide range of job opportunities that are available. So if we think about offsite construction, essentially what we're talking about is the industrialization of the construction industry. Essentially what we're trying to do is bring as much work away from the hostile construction site and into the factory where we can control things so much better, be that the tolerances we work to, the amount of waste we generate, the health and safety issues that people are facing on site. And I think the industrialization of construction will also produce new opportunities, new high quality jobs that currently don't exist, such as people who are interested, for example, in robotics or automation or logistics or quality control. And I think if we can achieve that in a smart construction environment, we will be able to fish, as it were, for our workforce from a much broader, much bigger pond. So a robotics expert might well be there in another sector, and we can hopefully bring them into the construction sector. So if we think about risk, we want to have a look today at the various stages of a construction project and think about how offsite construction, which I've shortened to OSC on some of these slides, how can it help de-risk? And if we think about the general progression of a project, it goes from inception and design through procurement, construction, and the in-use phases. But of course, in the offsite world, that construction phase is essentially replaced by two other phases, which is manufacture in the factory and then the logistics of delivering and assembling that project. So I wanted to start off a little bit thinking about how we can benefit at the inception and design stage. And I'll be the first to admit that the use of digital technologies in the design of construction projects is not exclusive to the offsite world. I myself have designed lots of traditional projects using BIM, but I've also designed something like 50 offsite projects using BIM, and I've seen the way that we can use that technology, for example, to be much more accurate in our designs, to build in tolerances that are appropriate to the materials we're using, to help the factory understand the assembly process, and so on. I just wanted to bring Warren in at this point. I know, Warren, that you're a great advocate of digital design in your organisation, and I know that you recognise some other advantages of capturing digital information. Can I hand over to you to talk about some of those?
Yeah, as I'm sure a lot of the attendees are aware, that the Building Safety Act comes into, or is in force, and this brings about certain requirements in terms of the golden thread of information and having what they call a common data environment, a CDE. So what we as an industry required, we need to have various pieces of information that's readily available for the clients and the end users. So we're looking at elements like the full as-built data, so that's got your specifications, your detailed drawings, materials, manufacturing data for the components as and when we can get them. And that delivers a traceability and accountability for all those products. We're looking at the fire safety aspects, so your fire resistance, your strategies, your ratings, barrier details, compartmentation, etc., etc. And then we'll put in other bits like structural performance. Obviously, we're an EN 1090 certified business, so we have to put information in of load ratings, and we can operate to certain execution classes. So we have to put performance criteria, declarations of performance, and that's all critical for modular assembly. We're also going to be able to put our certifications and compliance, so embed links for references within the drawings to any certification data, test reports, any fire tests and aspects like that, and general compliance documentation. We'll also, within that, we'll have potentially design registers with all the change revision history, clear records of all the design changes, updates to ensure that golden thread is maintained, and there's a continuity throughout the project, and other elements like other digital documentation, maintenance and inspection records, and any health and safety correspondence.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. I think it's really significant when we're thinking about our digital requirements that I always say to people who are potentially thinking about specifying their BIM projects is that essentially you can ask for anything in terms of digital data, but just don't ask for everything. Have a clear idea of what data you need, why you need it, and what you can do with it. Now, as Warren has described, for compliance purposes, using factory-made products and factory-made buildings, actually you're much better able to capture and transmit that digital information as your project progresses. But I think there are other benefits here that we are probably on the cusp of in the 21st century construction industry, which is that it's only a very small step now from the digital models that we're creating for design purposes to actually help those automate the production process. Certainly, I'm aware of companies that are doing generating tools that can simulate production lines, and I think it's a short step now between using digital models to automate the manufacture and assembly. So I think we can honestly say that the digital information that we achieve through BIM and factory processes, it makes it a much more secure building in terms of compliance, and also that data journey will continue right the way through, as we shall see, into the reuse area. I think one of the other things, if we look at the next stage in terms of procurement, it's always struck me. I worked with estimators, gosh, in the very early 80s, when the first portable computers were just about invented. And what happened was that they were, in those days, manually measuring paper drawings to create bills of quantities. And essentially what they were trying to do was use 2D data to estimate very complex buildings and try and quantify. And it was really, really difficult in those days to do that. And it's not until the advent, I don't think, of the BIM type models we've talked about that we can actually be sure about the quantities. So the first thing we can do is perhaps drive out waste in procurement. But I also think, and I'm going to ask Anna-Lee her feelings on this, about if we are now working a factory rather than lots of individual construction sites, does that produce opportunities for long-term relationships with your suppliers and long-term order and supply ranges? Anna-Lee, what's your experience? Does this help you with your relationships with your suppliers?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the beauty of modular is that the whole premise of it is that you have a more standardized approach. So being able to sort of look at those, what are those components that we need for that are sort of standardized across the modular builds. Obviously, we're going to do bespoke builds for different clients' needs, but they're always going to be standardized components that we can have pre-approved and tested, and that will then flow into us having less specification changes and less procurement errors. And all of that is built around having a strong relationship with your sort of key supply chain stakeholders. By looking at locking in those costs or those standardized components with those key suppliers, looking at a category buying that we've put a lot more focus over the last 2 to 3 years, and building those relationships has really allowed us to sort of make all of the factory processes and the whole from procurement through to the actual product going out of the factory doors down to the client site a much more efficient process.
Yeah, I imagine as well your suppliers, when they deliver to a traditional construction project, they might have an order come in for that project. That project could be remote. They make the delivery and might never need to go there again. Whereas with you developing these long-term relationships, they're delivering continuously at a pace and to the same location, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And they don't, and you can sort of bulk buy and not necessarily even have it at your site. If you've got the right suppliers working with you and you've got those relationships, you can then have them store it, but you've already sort of sourced it, and then you just call it off as and when you need it for the various projects.
There was a great piece of work done just before COVID, if I recall, which was called Project Seismic, which a handful of manufacturers and an architect and a cost consultant, and I think it was the Department for Education, looked at as to whether we could actually standardize components, not just in our own modular manufacturing company, but actually across the sector. The idea being that if, for example, Premier Modular were working to capacity, they could perhaps outsource some of the work to ostensibly a rival business. But also it gave clients the reassurance that if they needed a company to come back and build an extension to their offsite project, the componentry and the systems would be similar. But that's the ultimate expression of standardization. But absolutely take your point, Andy, that if you've got standardization of components and you've got a range of suppliers, you've got continuity of supply, you're driving down prices.
Mm.
I think we talked, didn't we, a few days ago about the thorny issue, though, of social value. I'm sure if there are any of our audience are from tier one contractors, they'll be aware that the traditional way of delivering social value is perhaps to buy products and components locally, to strike up apprenticeships, etc., etc. Talk to me a little bit, Andy, about how you perceive social value and how you can deliver social value.
I mean, you're right. It is a lot more tricky in this sort of modular environment to do social value in the way, particularly like if you look at the Tom's criteria, a lot of that is sort of geared towards what a traditional company in a location, and that's where they work, and that's only where we're ever going to work, because we do most of our work on site, and then we're delivering it to different sites. They're looking at what we're doing for the communities over there. So you've got to be a lot more creative in terms of how you come up with that. And we've taken the approach where we kind of come up with a tick box of things of, we've got these webinars available that schools in the local area could potentially learn from. We track travel and accommodation spend, because obviously you are pushing spend through that community by your people being in that area and working on the project site. But in terms of employing an apprentice, for instance, you can't go and guarantee that there are 18 months work happening in Birmingham and that you'd be able to see out that apprenticeship and they'd be able to do their sort of evidence portfolio. So in that regard, we've really pushed the academy at the Premier Modular site in Bransburton, and we've tripled the amount of apprentices we take in about 3 years ago. So we do spend a lot of time and effort on looking at what is the client in particular looking for in terms of social value, what's on their agenda, and how can we creatively come up with a solution to demonstrate that we're doing our bit on that.
Thanks, Andy. I think what occurred to me when we were talking about this presentation was there is another aspect of social value that I myself am interested in. So I studied for an MSc in offsite construction, and my dissertation was looking at the well-being benefits of procuring offsite solutions. So I worked with lots of site managers from both traditional construction and offsite construction. And it struck me that the greater project certainty that comes with offsite construction probably reduces the stress on the site management teams. So that was the topic of my research. And so it proved. My interviewees were unanimous in recognizing that they were far less stressed, there were far fewer problems using offsite solutions. So my proposition to the industry is that when you are procuring a solution and you are comparing traditional construction to offsite construction, one of your procurement KPIs should be the harm or potential harm you might be doing to the workforce. And for me, that is a form of social value. Just to give you more guidance in the audience on the topic of social value, a colleague of mine a couple of years ago, through the Offsite Leadership Group, wrote this report, which is showing how we believe that we can square the circle. Clearly, the pressure in delivering social value is always to think locally, whereas we think social value, if we step back a little bit, can still be achieved, albeit perhaps not right at the construction site. But I do urge you to have a look at this report. My colleague Michael, when he follows up with you in the audience, will send you the appropriate links. So I want to move on to the next stage, which really is in construction terms. This is the point where we're not now working on site, we're actually doing as much as we can in the factory. So Warren, from your point of view, some of the benefits of a manufactured solution rather than the on-site traditional solution.
Yeah, I think one thing we've got to be everybody's got to be aware of from the start is, while we are manufacturing, we can do any works that are required on civils, so groundworks, etc., foundations. They can all be running concurrently while the manufacture in the factories takes place. Obviously, when we're doing work within the factories, from a health and safety, we've got that risk reduction. You've got a controlled environment. You know, modules are constructed, we're regulated, temperatures are reasonably good and understanding those sorts of issues. We haven't got the masses of transportation moving through parts of the site. Yes, we've got designated roadways, etc. We're protected for inclement weather. We haven't got site congestion. We haven't got hot spots. We've got dedicated areas for storage, unloading, etc. We've got standardized build processes. So they go through, you build the steel first, the framework, floors, ceilings, and it goes through the factory. So you've got repetition as we go through a factory. Typically, we have fewer workers than we would have on the construction site, primarily because 80% of the work is done within a factory. So you'll have less tradesmen at the construction site when the installation is there. We have better control of higher risk activities. And there's obviously less of those issues. So working at height, putting on roofs, and so we've got safety lines, we've got on-site training. You can do M&E, first fix within the site, so everything is better controlled. We have subcontractor managers, so there's a focus on any subcontract teams that we're working on. Additionally, from that point of view, we've also got a high regard for sustainability in the environment. We are fortunate that we have solar PV, so we've got a reduced energy cost. Yes, we've had a capital outlay, but we can use the solar energy, which is fantastic during this time of the year. We have better control of materials, because we only order what we need. And then we can afford in each factory to do any waste segregation. So waste isn't just left all over the place. You've got better standards of housekeeping, lower discarded materials, and those elements. We've also got, because we've got solar, we've also looked at green energy from obviously the big six, as it were. So we've got lower carbon emissions. And then from a haulage perspective, we engage with bores and clocks.
I'll come back to you if I may, Warren, on the haulage. I want to look at delivery and assembly in a minute, but I'd like to pick up on a couple of things you said. The first one was around the time sequencing and work going on site, and that's absolutely true. That inevitably on any construction project there will be work that's required in situ, and that's typically in the ground. But I recall a project I worked on as a designer must be 25 years ago now, where it was a housing project on contaminated land, and it was severely contaminated with hydrocarbons and heavy metals. And the solution we chose was called bioremediation, which involves essentially driving air and living organisms into the soils, and they essentially digest the polluted soils. And it was thoroughly impressive, but what it actually meant was our site was sterilized, no pun intended, but nothing could happen on the site until that bioremediation process was complete. And in those days, it never occurred to us to actually think about an offsite solution, because if we had, while that remediation work was going on, manufacturing could have started in the factory, meaning that as soon as the site was clear, we could have been building much, much quicker. And for me, that's another area where we can de-risk our projects, because we know, first of all, that we're going to be on site for a much shorter period. So our prelims, overheads, the hiring of scaffold or facilities or whatever it is much reduced. And we know that the manufacturing process in the factory is unaffected by weather or inclement conditions. So we can reasonably expect certainty of delivery. So all those things, I think, if you take them in a whole, that actually is helping de-risk your construction project. Also really pleased to hear, Warren, about your zero waste to landfill. ambitions. And certainly, first of all, you're using materials in a less wasteful fashion. They're less likely to get lost or damaged compared to out on a construction site, etc., etc. So you're driving down the amount of material that you're using. And I think the renewable energy in the factory is a tremendous advantage. If we think about de-risking the project, as we know, you've essentially established certainty of energy supply in these turbulent times, but also you're driving down, aren't you, the CO2 emissions that are typically associated with construction projects. I think construction is something like responsible for 40% of emissions around the world. So anything we can do to drive that down is really great. And the final one I wanted to pick up on was the danger, or the lesser danger to your workforce. They are, aren't they, working in much less hostile conditions than the poor people out on site, where it could be raining, snowing, where multiple trades are occupying the same space, and that creates slip, trips, and fall hazards. They're doing far less work at height. So yeah, I think that was a great summary, Warren. Thanks for that. And I think we can say that there's far less risk to those involved in a manufacturing process.
I think there's just a couple of bits to add on there. You've obviously we briefly touched on the programming and schedule risk that we quickly mentioned, but we've also got the quality and compliance as it goes through the factory. Things are being checked frequently. We've got improved testing at the front end through design and the requirements that were required there. And because we can deliver bespoke solutions, we can actually still have the same standards that are applied throughout the factory. There's documentation, there's ITPs. So they're all running through the factory with the same paperwork, each module as it goes through, signed off by supervisors, by managers, and by the quality team.
Yeah, I have to say that in my dissertation research, all the site managers I interviewed took quality as a given from factory made solutions. And I think that spoke volumes.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk about one of the other areas that might not necessarily seem as though we're de-risking projects when we talk about delivery and assembly. You started to touch, Warren, on delivery, which of course, what we're actually doing now is moving quite large, bulky deliveries on much bigger vehicles. Talk to me about how you think, nevertheless, that is less of a risk.
Well, everything's scheduled. So we ourselves use specialist subcontractors. They're vetted and approved, and they have to have the relevant certification, like we say, it's clocks and fours. And we're looking, and remember, this is direct transport from factory to whatever site it is across the UK. And we then require that company to, we will have given them the size of the loads, an idea of tonnage of each of the modules, because they all weigh slightly different depending on what the design is. That they've got to do road planning, looking at bridges and load capacities, because not everything is a standard dimension. So they'll go away, plan routes, look for any permits, confirm any additional support vehicles that are required, and then they will plan it. They will have a providers. Providers, yes, we can give you the number of vehicles, and then we'll have a load plan, because everything has to go to site in a particular order. So size, weight, permit notifications will be conducted. They'll be discussing along with ourselves any issues with the local authorities for road closures. This is quite commonplace across London. And then we've obviously got to look and make sure from a structural element during the transport that we've got load integrity. So we've got loading plans, and then we've got quality documentation to issue to the driver who then accepts that, you know, that load is fit for transport. It then goes off in sequence to the site, and obviously they're in contact on a continual basis with our relevant site managers, and we're looking to give a just-in-time readiness sort of process to the modular delivery. So the site manager knows when that load is coming to site. His team can be ready to unload. That includes the crane, any ballast that'll already be set on site. What we call an install team will be ready to support the crane, guide that module in, and that subsequently that precise sequencing allows for a minimisation of risk with the local community. Again, potentially adding social value to that. So we'll have done all the good things, contacted the community, etc. And then the issues that we've got, we're always open to weather when we're using the cranes. So there'll be days when we'll have to delay because wind speeds are so high, or we've got excessive ice, etc. But when they get to site, you know, the craneage removes it off the vehicle, lands it. You know, we've got all rams and everything, lift plans for all of the movements that are taking place. By using contract lifts, we've de-risked because the crane company have the insurance risk and the risk in basically looking at any damage that's created, and they've got third party liability. So they've got all that, and it's landed, and then it's built in that sequence that has been predetermined. We appreciate that in some circumstances there may be delay in a factory for a certain module, and it may go out of sequence, but then there will be a discussion and say, well, we can do this, and this, and everybody is kept in the loop to try and minimise any issue for the site. And I would say 99 times out of 100, the installation goes to sequence. You know, sometimes it may be because of there may be delays because of weather, but that is pretty much it.
Yeah. So what I'm sensing here is that we can't shy away from the fact that we're going to be using much bigger vehicles and much heavier plant and equipment to deliver the product to site compared to traditional construction. And one could imagine that that could make perhaps adjoining premises or local residents somewhat nervous. But I think what we need to do is contrast that against the typical construction site, which has got large numbers of much smaller vehicles every single day traveling to and from that workplace. One can see in the mind's eye white vans blocking residential streets because there's no parking facility near the site, etc., etc. And of course, by delivering the offsite solution, we're actually shortening the overall project period, we hope. I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine about the comparison of the CO2 emissions from dozens of white vans compared to the smaller number of large vehicles. And I can't remember whether he said he'd found evidence to prove it was better to do offsite, or whether he said we should research this topic. But I think we could probably make a case that in terms of the environmental impact, the fewer deliveries on bigger vehicles is probably less harmful than dozens of smaller vehicles over a much larger time scale. Yes, sorry, Warren.
That is typically the justification in environmental de-risking of carbon emissions from the vehicles. But we also make sure that the fleets that we use are to the latest standard. So they're the best available on the market. So our supply chain partners have got EU rated top of the range sort of trucks.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think there are some risks that are peculiar to an offsite solution, but I think the fact that you made that point about the extremely careful planning, time sequencing, certainty of delivery, etc., I believe de-risks the project. I can see, Warren, that you've been multitasking because I've opened the Q&A box and I can see you've answered through the keyboard a couple of questions already. So thank you for doing that. Audience, if you have got any questions that you want to add, use the Q&A box. We'll monitor it and come back to it shortly. But I want to just to be now thinking about the in-use phase and also potentially the reuse phase. And I think in terms of one of the benefits of using a manufactured solution is the opportunity, Warren, to reuse and repurpose buildings.
Yeah, typically the majority of our modules have got we hold two divisions in terms of we have a permanent division, which is we sell that school, sell that hospital or ward, whatever we've done, or we've got a rental fleet. Both elements are made with steel panels, etc. But certainly for the rental fleet, that has got an extended product life cycle, which is predominantly 50, 60 years. So it can go out on hire for rental for 3 years, come back, be repurposed. So it goes out as a hospital, comes back, and next time it might be office accommodation for a construction site. So we've got improved sort of time periods for these units. We hold BOPAS certification. If we was to build any residential units, we could use that scheme. And that in itself.
Well, let me just butt in there. We're using an acronym. BOPAS stands for Build Offsite Property Assurance Scheme, and it's essentially equivalent to something like an NHBC warranty, but it recognises the shall we say the peculiarities of delivering an offsite solution. But it's a way that the insurance industry is demonstrating confidence in offsite solutions. Sorry to interrupt, but not everybody may know some of the acronyms.
Yeah, and that's going to typically, on a sale job, that's giving the person who's looking at a mortgage or finance on that, 2 terms. So typically 60 years, 2 mortgages are 30 years. And with our ability to in-use, reuse, we've got elements of flexibility and adaptability. And as I said previously, we've had jobs where we've been building a hospital ward, typically during COVID, for example, and at the 11th hour, and I do mean at the 11th hour, the NHS come back to us and said, we don't actually need it now. We didn't realise how far the Nightingale Hospital is to us, so we're going to use that. That's fine. And we adapted it and moved it on to a different part of the UK for a different purpose. So, and that was, the flexibility to be able to do that and turn that around within space of 2 or 3 weeks after it was fully built and it was set to go out the following day. We have closed loop systems, repair and refurb for anything that's coming back. We're able to take materials out, clean them, repair them, and potentially at times reuse them. Windows, for example, may not be required in a new design. Take it out in one part, but we can reuse it with another. You've obviously got quick deployment in use and reuse. So, as I say, the transition from one specific purpose to another can be the matter of a couple of 3 weeks. That lowers cost for the end user, less capital outlay for the end user, and therefore provides obviously a good benefit. And we've got the typical elements of we've got less waste generated, less energy used, etc., etc.
Yeah, and it's by definition it's exclusive, this opportunity really, to the manufactured solution compared to the traditional construction solution. It's really difficult to take down and rebuild a building somewhere, but I'm really excited to see in the future how we use offsite construction and repurpose our buildings in due course. I'm going to move across to a little bit of a sum up, if you like, of what we talked about. So we've looked at the way that digital design that typically is used in the offsite sector can assist with quantifying all the materials accurately and developing robust details, and also really importantly capturing this golden thread data about the components and systems in the buildings. We've looked at some of the procurement benefits, the way those long-term relationships with suppliers and using standardization can drive down costs and give continuity of supply and therefore de-risk that supply chain. We had a quick look at some of the social value opportunities that might not seem obvious at first, but I believe we can achieve. We've looked at manufacturing compared to working out on a construction site, some of the health and safety benefits to the workforce, both their physical and their mental well-being. We've looked at some of the accuracy and quality we can achieve. We've also looked at how manufacturing typically reduces waste. For anybody who's attended an offsite event that I've spoken at, forgive me if you've heard this story before, but I attended a presentation by the production director of Toyota GB, who build 2,900 cars a day in the plant at Derby. And he asked his audience to guess the amount of waste in terms of number of skips they needed at the end of each shift. His answer was 0. They don't produce any waste. They use everything. And yet there are multiple reports over the past 30, 40 years that suggest in construction we waste something like 20 to 30% of our resources. For every 4 houses we build, we bought the materials for 5. That is completely unsustainable. And I believe offsite construction is one of the ways we can significantly drive down our waste. And we've looked at delivery of buildings and the assembly of buildings in place of constructing them. We've looked at traffic movements. We've looked at how we can shorten contract periods and create overall less noise and waste. One of the things I forgot to mention when we were talking about assembly was something called FOD, another acronym which stands for foreign object damage. And we've got a great example by one of our partners, NG Bailey, who delivered prefabricated offsite built project to, I think it was Heathrow Airport, where anything such as a piece of packaging or a cement bag, whatever it is, if that gets sucked up into a jet engine, you can imagine the implications. So by choosing that offsite solution, they almost virtually eliminated every piece of packaging on the site. And then we've looked at the in-use and more importantly, the reuse opportunities by delivering the projects through offsite construction. And that can contribute to a kind of circular economy approach. So I just wanted to, if I may, draw your attention to some of the Supply Chain School's offsite resources. We can help you with your knowledge or understanding of the broad range of offsite construction. It's more than just what we've seen today. One of the reports we have, which you might be interested in, is the Whole Life Carbon Guidance. This was another report we wrote in the school a year or two back, where we believe offsite construction provides great opportunities to reduce carbon impact during construction. And I think we touched on that earlier. And also the report that I wrote, which I alluded to earlier, about the well-being benefits of giving people project certainty and fewer stresses and the impact that has on their lives. And just very finally, if I can just swap screens. over here, is to just point you, audience, if I may, to the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is supplychainschool.co.uk. You will find that if you hover over the topics area, you can see that there is an offsite section, which is what's showing here. Scroll down and you'll find lots of support. So most of our offsite resources have been written and created for people who are already in the construction industry and have some knowledge and skills, but perhaps need to learn new skills to transition more towards an offsite future. And that comprises reports, there are e-learning modules, and lots of downloadable resources. And the way we've structured the resources is by job role. So we've created a section on offsite for designers, offsite for cost consultants, for procurement managers, for logistics managers, project managers and site managers, and so on. So do have a look at our offsite resources. I'd also encourage you to go to your school dashboard, and if you have marked that you are interested in offsite, here you'll find an opportunity to take an assessment. Why would you do that? Well, the reason is there are so many resources around the topic on the school platform. We want to give you the quickest possible access to the resources that fill the gaps in your knowledge. So by taking the offsite assessment, answering a series of questions about your knowledge about various aspects of offsite, our algorithms on the site will present you with a package of 10 learning materials that immediately address the gaps in your knowledge that you've told us about. So it's if you like, a quick way to get the fastest support for you. I hope, audience, that's been of interest. I believe that offsite construction delivers enormous benefits, and today we've looked mostly at how offsite can de-risk your projects. Thank you, Anne-Lee. Thank you, Warren from Premier Modular. Been a joy to prepare for this session and to talk to you today and hear about your experiences. Audience, I can see my colleague Michael has put a link to a feedback form. I understand it's really galling being asked for feedback with every transaction. My latest story about being asked for feedback is I bought a box of 1.5-inch screws and Amazon want me to give some feedback. I know everybody asks for feedback, but it really helps us if you can tell us how well you enjoyed this particular session. So we're nearly out of time. Anne-Lee, Warren, thank you once again. Audience, thank you for attending, and we'll declare the session closed.